Cowboy refused every woman in town until she said, "You want a wife or just a winter alone?" The first snow always came early in Silver Creek. It crept down from the mountains like a quiet warning, dusting the rooftops and painting the ridges white before the folks in town were ready for it. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and out on the open land, a lone rider made his way home before the sky turned to steel. His name was Cole Tanner, a man most people in Silver Creek had given up trying to figure out. He didn't talk much, didn't laugh much either. A hard-working cowboy who owned a stretch of land a few miles outside town, Cole had a way of keeping himself that made people wonder what kind of ghost he lived with. Some said he was heartbroken. Others whispered he'd killed a man once, or maybe lost someone in the war. Whatever the truth was, Cole Tanner carried it quietly, the way a man carries a scar he's learned not to touch. Every few weeks, he rode into town for supplies. Folks would nod to him, and he'd nod back, polite but distant. The widows and single girls tried their share of smiles and small talk, but Cole never encouraged a one. At the general store that morning, the gossip was already flowing before he'd even dismounted. "Look there," one of the women murmured by the water barrel. "There's a man who turned down every woman in town. Cold as the river in January, that one." Cole ignored them. Same as always. He tied his horse, Dusty, to the post and stepped inside, boots thudding across the wooden floor. Harvey Green, the storekeeper, greeted him with a grin. "Morning, Cole. Guessing you're here for your usual." Cole nodded. "Coffee, flour, beans, and lamp oil. Make it quick. Storm's brewing." Harvey chuckled as he packed the order. "You ever think about adding something sweet to that list? Mrs. Hargreaves sent over a fresh apple pie this morning. You could do with a bit of sugar in your life." Cole didn't even look up from counting his coins. "Sweet don't last long out where I live." When Harvey passed him a sack of supplies, he gave the cowboy a knowing smile. "You're going to freeze to death alone in that cabin, Cole Tanner." Cole lifted the bag with one arm and met his gaze, steady and calm, better cold than crowded. And with that, he stepped back out into cold morning, the conversation following him like a draft under a door. Outside, a young woman named Eliza May, who ran the sewing shop, called after him shyly, "Mr. Tanner, we're having a church supper this Sunday. You'd be most welcome." Cole stopped long enough to tip his hat. "Appreciate it, Miss Eliza, but I'm a better hand with a horse than with crowds." The smile on her lips faltered, but she nodded all the same. By the time she blinked, he was already riding out of town, his horse's hooves leaving prints that the wind soon covered. The ride back to his ranch was quiet except for the rhythm of hooves and the soft moan of the wind. His land came into view, a wide, lonely stretch at the foot of the hills, with a small log cabin and a barn that had seen better years. It wasn't much, but it was his. He unsaddled Dusty, brushed him down, and hauled in his supplies. The sun was setting by the time he lit the first fire on the hearth, orange light spilling across the cabin's bare floorboards. There wasn't much inside: a table, a chair, a bed neatly made, and a single-framed photograph on the mantel. Two young men, smiling in their Sunday best, stood side by side. One was Cole, the other, his younger brother, Luke. Cole stared at the picture for a long time, his jaw tightening. "Reckon you call me stubborn, little brother," he muttered under his breath. "But you're not the one sitting in this cold house." He placed the photograph back carefully and sat down by the fire, boots stretched toward the flames. The room filled with the crackle of wood and the low whistle of wind outside. That was how Cole Tanner lived, simple, silent, and alone. The town liked to say he didn't need anyone. But they didn't see the nights when he sat by that fire, listening to it burn, and wondering if maybe he'd made his life too small. They didn't hear the thoughts that came when the wind howled hard enough to sound like a voice calling his name. He told himself he was fine that way, that needing someone was a weakness. But deep down, under the quiet and the pride, was a man who'd forgotten what warmth really felt like. And out there somewhere, though he didn't know it yet, the woman who would change everything was already on her way to Silver Creek. The wind carried a new scent into Silver Creek that day. Not snow, not pine, but something unfamiliar, something restless. It came with the sound of wagon wheels creaking and a stagecoach rattling down the frozen road, drawn by two weary horses. The whole town turned to look as it stopped in front of the saloon. From a cloud of dust and cold air stepped a woman, tall, sharp-eyed, and carrying a satchel that looked like it held all she owned in this world. Her name was Mara Dwyer. The driver tipped his hat. "Silver Creek, miss." End of the line. Mara nodded, scanning the small, wind-bitten town. The blacksmith hammering across the street, the ladies gossiping by the general store, the preacher's bell hanging still in the distance. She stood straight against the cold, the kind of woman used to hard places and harder people. She had traveled from Kansas, she told the saloon keeper later, looking for work, maybe as a cook, a seamstress, or just anywhere she could earn her keep. Her voice was steady, but behind it lingered the kind of hurt that only comes from running away from something. Inside the Silver Creek saloon, the air was thick with cigar smoke and fiddle music. Men played cards and traded stories louder than the truth. Mara took a job serving drinks before the sun went down, tying on an apron and walking with a confidence that made half the room turn their heads. That's where she first heard his name. "Cole Tanner?" The bartender said with a laugh when she asked who owned that ranch she'd seen riding in. "Lady, you could set the place on fire, and he'd still rather freeze alone than let you stay the night." "Sounds like he's got a problem," Mara replied. The man chuckled, wiping a glass. "He's got plenty, mostly pride." Later that evening, she overheard two women talking near the stove. "He's turned down every woman in Silver Creek. Even the widow Harper tried to bake her way into his heart. Poor fool, never stood a chance. He don't want company, don't want love. Just that old ranch and his ghosts." Mara couldn't help but smile. "A man like that," she said quietly to herself, "sounds like he's due for someone to tell him the truth." The next morning, Silver Creek woke to a bright, bitter cold, the kind that bit through coats and made the horse's breath hang in the air like fog. Mara pulled her shawl tight and walked across the street to the general store. That's when she saw him for the first time. Cole Tanner stood beside his horse, loading sacks of feed onto the wagon. The sun hit the brim of his hat just enough to cast his eyes in shadow. He moved like a man who'd learned to make every motion count. Steady, silent, no wasted effort. Something about him caught her attention. Not his size or his looks, though both were striking. It was a stillness, the kind of quiet that made other people want to talk, just to fill it. She leaned against the hitching post, watching him. "You're the one who doesn't talk to women," she said finally, her tone playful but edged with curiosity. Cole didn't glance up. "I talk when I got something worth saying." Mara raised an eyebrow. "That right? Guess that means you don't say much." That earned the smallest flicker of smirk. Gone as soon as it appeared. "You new here? Got in yesterday." She crossed her arms. "Seems like everyone in town's got an opinion about you. I wanted to see if they were right." Cole set down the feed bag, dusting his hands. "And what did they say?" "That you don't want a wife, don't want friends, and don't need anyone." Her voice softened. "Sounds lonely to me." Cole looked at her then. Really looked. There was something defiant in her eyes, something alive that reminded him of the wild colts he used to break. He wasn't sure if she was trying to provoke him or simply tell the truth. "Lonely's a choice," he said at last, turning back to his wagon. "Some of us prefer it." Mara smiled faintly. "You keep saying that long enough, maybe you'll start believing it." And with that, she turned and walked away, her boots crunching against the frost. Cole watched her go, though he wouldn't admit it, not even to himself. That night, Silver Creek slept under a pale, frozen moon. Cole sat by his fire again, the same as always, but the silence that usually brought him comfort felt different, restless somehow. Her words came back to him, soft and certain. "Sounds lonely to me." He stared at the flames a long time, remembering her eyes, sharp, steady, unafraid. He poured another cup of coffee, trying to shake the thought of her voice. But it lingered, the way a spark lingers in the ashes long after the fire's gone out. Mara, meanwhile, stood at her window above the saloon, looking out across the dark valley. Somewhere out there, that proud, quiet cowboy sat in his cabin pretending he didn't need anyone. She smiled to herself. "I'll bet you do," she whispered. "You just don't know it yet." The days grew colder in Silver Creek. The sky hung low and gray, the kind that made a man feel small against the weight of the season. Snow fell gentle at first, then steady, blanketing the land until fences vanished and footsteps disappeared. Most folks huddled close to their stoves and fires. The saloon grew louder each night. Laughter, whiskey, piano tunes meant to chase away the cold. But Cole Tanner stayed out on his ranch, chopping wood, patching fences, doing anything to stay busy. Work had always been his way of not thinking too much. Still, he couldn't shake the memory of that woman with the bold eyes and quicker tongue. Mara Dwyer. She'd been in town just a week, and already her name was on everyone's lips. And not just for her looks. She had a way of standing her ground, of saying what she meant without a hint of fear. The men didn't quite know what to make of her, and the women couldn't decide if they liked her or not. But Cole, he kept thinking of her voice. Sounds lonely to me. It had settled in his mind like a thorn he couldn't pull loose. One late afternoon, as a snowstorm rolled down from the ridge, Mara stood in the general store, bundled in a thick coat and scarf, helping Harvey sort supplies. The stagecoach had been delayed, and folks were anxious about getting stocked before the mountain pass closed. "Got a delivery needs Taquine to Tanner's place," Harvey said, glancing toward a crate by the counter. "He ordered feed and oil last week. If he don't get before the storm hits, he'll be icing for sure." He looked up at Mara. "You said you ain't afraid of riding in the cold. Think you could manage it? Pays double." She hesitated only a second before nodding. "If that man freezes this winter, it's not going to be my fault." Harvey chuckled. "You sure you know what you're getting into? Tanner don't take kindly to surprise visitors." Mara gave him a half-smile. "Then he'll just have to get used to disappointment." The snow was falling harder by the time she reached his ranch, a lonely figure on horseback, the crate tied behind her saddle. Wind whipped her hair from under her hat, and her cheeks burned red with cold. She knocked on the cabin door with her gloved hand. After a long moment, it opened. Cole stood there, rugged, coat open, jaw tight. Surprise flickered across his face when he saw her. "Mara Dwyer," he said slowly. "You lost." She brushed snow from her coat. "No, just making a delivery. Feed and oil. Figured you'd rather that than another blizzard with no light." Cole leaned against the doorframe. "Didn't order company." She raised a brow. "Lucky for you. I didn't bring any. Just supplies and a question." He frowned slightly. "A question?" Her eyes met his, steady and bright against the gray light. "You want a wife, Tanner, or just another winter alone?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Sharp, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. Cole's breath caught in his chest. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Only the wind and the creak of the porch broke the silence. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mara smirked faintly. "Didn't think you'd answer. Proud men never do." She turned back toward her horse, tugging her coat tight. But as she swung into the saddle, Cole's voice came low and rough behind her. "You don't know me, Miss Dwyer." She looked back over her shoulder. "No, but I see you clear enough." And with that, she rode off into falling snow, her figure disappearing into the white horizon, like a ghost leaving him behind. Cole stood on the porch long after she was gone, snow gathering on his hat brim, her words echoing in his mind. "You want a wife, Tanner, or just another winter alone?" He went back inside, lit a lamp, and stared at the flame until it blurred. He wasn't used to being questioned. Not about how he lived, not about what he felt. But there was something about her voice, the way it didn't tremble or beg, that stirred something in him. He sat by the fire, the storm raging outside, and for the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel right. It felt empty. That night, Cole dreamed of a woman's laughter echoing through his cabin, of 2 coffee cups instead of 1, of warmth that wasn't just from firewood. He woke before dawn, restless and uncertain. Out the window, the snow had covered every trace of her horse's tracks. But her question, that stayed. "You want a wife, or just another winter alone?" And though he didn't know it yet, that was the moment his life began to change. Winter pressed hard on Silver Creek, the kind of cold that split fence posts and made breath hang in the air like ghosts. The river froze solid, and the snow piled so high on the roofs that the whole town seemed buried beneath silence. But something had shifted, not in the weather, but in Cole Tanner. Ever since that day on his porch, he hadn't been able to shake the memory of her. The way Mara Dwyer had looked him in the eye without flinching, the way her voice cut through the cold like the crack of a whip. "You want a wife, Tanner, or just another winter alone?" Those words haunted him more than the wind ever could. Cole found himself riding into town more often than he needed to. He told himself it was for supplies, or to check the telegraph, or to help Harvey haul feed to the barn. But the truth sat somewhere deeper. Each time he came down that main street, his eyes drifted to the saloon windows, to the soft glow spilling out into the snow. That's where she worked now, serving drinks, laughing with miners, her dark hair tied back under a simple scarf. Sometimes he'd catch a glimpse of her through the glass, and he'd keep walking, pretending not to care. Other times, he'd tie Dusty to the post out front, push through the doors, and order coffee instead of whiskey, just to have a reason to sit a while. Mara noticed, of course. She always did. "You looking for something?" she asked one evening as she set a cup in front of him. Cole lifted his gaze to meet hers. "Coffee," he said simply. She smirked. "And here I thought you came for the company." He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched, just enough for her to see that somewhere under all that quiet, the man did have a heart that could still remember how to smile. That night, a fight broke out in the saloon. Two drifters, drunk and mean, started shoving each other near the bar. The argument turned ugly, and when one of them reached for Mara's wrist, Cole was already there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You boys done talking to the lady?" The tone in his voice stopped him cold. The drifter laughed nervously, trying to play tough. "Didn't mean no harm. Cowboy." Cole stepped closer. "Then best you move along before harm comes looking for you." The men left mumbling, and the room slowly returned to its noise and laughter. But Mara just stood there, watching him. The way his jaw clenched, the way his hands trembled just a little once it was over. He wasn't a man who picked fights. He was a man who ended them when he had to. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Didn't do it for you," he replied. But they both knew better. The next morning, Mara found him mending a fence on the edge of town. The sun was out for the first time in days, casting long shadows across the snow. She walked up with 2 cups of coffee, steam curling into the cold air. "Brought you something to thaw you out," she said, handing him one. "You don't give up easy, do you?" he asked, taking it. Never saw much use in quitting. They stood there for a moment, sipping coffee in the quiet. The air between them felt different, warmer somehow, despite the frost still clinging to the fence posts. "You got a reason for coming out here?" he asked finally. "Guess I was curious," she said. Wanted to see if the man under all that silence was still human. He huffed out a small laugh. "I might be. Don't test it, though." That made her grin. "I'll take my chances." As the days passed, Mara started stopping by more often. Once to drop off mail, once to check on a horse, once with a loaf of bread she swore she'd made too much of. Cole stopped pretending. He didn't look forward to those visits. Sometimes they worked side by side in the barn, not talking much. Other times, they'd share dinner by the fire, stew, bread, and quiet conversation that said more than words could. Mara told him about Kansas, about losing her father to a fever, about running from a life that felt too small. Cole told her little, but she learned to listen between the silences. She saw the scar that ran across his ribs one night when he stretched near the firelight, and though she didn't ask about it, he noticed her glance. For once, he didn't turn away. Spring was still far off, but in that cabin on the edge of the valley, the first thaw had already begun. It wasn't in the land, it was in him. Cole Tanner, the man who once swore he needed no one, found himself looking forward to footsteps on his porch, to laughter echoing in the small room, to warmth that came from more than firewood. He'd never say it out loud. Not yet, but the silence between them had changed. It no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like peace. And for the first time in years, Cole Tanner wasn't waiting for winter to end. He was hoping spring would come soon. The sky had that heavy, bruised color that came before a bad storm. Silver Creek folks knew the signs. The sudden stillness, the way the air went sharp, like the whole world was holding its breath. By sundown, the wind was already howling down from the mountains, sweeping snow across the valley in great, swirling sheets. Cole Tanner rode hard for home, pulling his coat tighter, his horse dusty, snorting clouds of steam into the freezing dusk. He'd gone into town for nails and lantern oil, but before he could even tie his horse outside the general store, someone called out from the saloon. It was Mara. She stood at the door with a scarf over her hair and a look that said she wasn't asking permission. "You best not be riding home alone in that, Tanner." "Storm will pass," he muttered. "You'll freeze before it does." The wind picked up, whipping her words away, but she was already crossing the street, boots crunching in the snow, a small bundle under her arm. "You're coming with me," she said firmly. "I ain't." "You can argue later. Right now, move." And for reasons he couldn't name, Cole did as she said. By the time they reached his cabin, the world outside had turned white. Sky, ground, horizon, all of it swallowed by snow. The wind screamed through the trees, rattling the shutters as Cole slammed the door behind them. Mara set her bundle on the table, bread, jerky, and a small bottle of whiskey. "You live too far from town," she said, brushing snow from her shoulders. "That's the point." "Yeah, I can tell," she said dryly. "Looks like you've been talking to the walls for company." Cole gave her a sidelong look, then crouched near the hearth to stir the fire back to life. The flames caught slow, flickering against the rough-hewn walls. When the light finally filled the room, Mara saw how bare it was. One chair, one bed, one man's life built on solitude. She set the food out, poured whiskey into 2 cups, and sat across from him. "Storm's not letting up soon," she said. "You always this talkative?" he asked. "Only when someone's too quiet." Hours passed. The fire burned low, and the wind battered the walls. Cole mended a broken strap, while Mara hummed a tune she half remembered from childhood. It was strange, the sound of another person's voice in that lonely cabin. Stranger still that it felt right. Then, when she rose to add wood to the fire, she caught sight of something, a deep, twisted scar that ran across his shoulder and down his chest, disappearing under his shirt. Her voice softened. "That from the war?" He froze. The question hung between them, like a spark that might burn if touched. "Ain't a story worth telling," he said finally. "Maybe not to you," she said gently, "but it made you who you are." Cole looked at her then, really looked, her eyes steady, her voice quiet but unafraid. He could have stayed silent, could have turned away like he always did, but the storm outside pressed hard, and something about the warmth inside the cabin made it impossible to keep the past buried. "Wasn't the war," he said, voice rough. "Was a cattle raid. 3 men came in the night, took the herd, shot my brother trying to stop him. I went after him, came back with nothing but that scar." The fire popped. Mara didn't speak. She just moved closer, kneeling by the hearth beside him. "You blame yourself. Ain't no one else left to blame." For a moment, the only sound was the wind's long moan across the roof. Then she reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Not pity, just presence. "You can't fix what's gone, Cole, but you can stop punishing yourself for surviving it." He stared into the fire, her words working their way through him slow as thawed snow in spring. No one had said his name like that before. Soft, steady, human. "You got a habit of telling men things they don't want to hear?" he asked finally. "Only the ones worth savon," she replied. The storm raged on through the night. At some point, the 2 of them fell quiet, Mara resting her head on his shoulder, Cole sitting still as stone, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile thing had settled between them. The wind howled, the fire hissed, and somewhere in the middle of all that fury and silence, Cole Tanner realized he wasn't afraid of the storm anymore. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone in it. By morning, the world outside had gone still again, the kind of stillness that comes only after something wild has passed. Snow lay thick on the windowsills, sparkling under a weak sunrise. Mara woke first, still wrapped in the blanket he draped over her shoulders. Cole was already up, splitting kindling outside, his breath a cloud in the cold morning air. She stood in the doorway, watching him. For the first time, he didn't look like a man running from ghosts. He looked like someone who might, just might, be ready to start living again. And deep down, Mara knew she wasn't going anywhere. The storm broke, but its echo lingered. For 3 days, the snow lay deep over Silver Creek, glittering, untouched, quiet as a hell breath. Smoke curled from cabin chimneys, and life slowly crept back into the streets. By the time Cole Tanner rode into town again, the whispers had already begun. 2 pairs of eyes turned as he passed the blacksmith. A woman sweeping her porch paused, whispering to her neighbor. Over at the general store, Mr. Avery's wife muttered behind the counter. Stayed the whole night, they say. Alone. Silver Creek was a small place, too small for secrets. Cole didn't hear the words, but he felt them. He'd lived long enough among gossip to know what it sounded like when it turned sharp. When he stepped into the saloon that evening, the chatter quieted for half a second, just enough for Mara to notice. She was wiping down the bar, her hair loose from its usual tie, a faint smile on her lips when she saw him. But when she caught the shift in the room, her expression changed. They talkin'? He asked quietly when she came near. They're always talkin', Cole. Can't stop the wind. Yeah, but wind don't cut near as deep. She looked up at him then, steady, unflinching. Let him talk. I ain't ashamed of riding out that storm with you. He wished he could have said the same. That night, on the ride back to his ranch, Cole couldn't shake the feeling crawling under his skin. Pride had always been his armor, thick, unbending, but now it felt like a wall between him and the one thing that made him feel alive again. He'd spent years building that solitude, board by board, silence by silence. And now here came a woman who made it all feel wrong, unbearably lonely. By the time the next morning's light poured across the valley, his decision was made, the kind of decision men make not out of sense, but fear. When Mara showed up at his cabin with coffee and a loaf of bread, he didn't open the door right away. When he finally did, his face was unreadable. You riding all this way again? He said. Brought breakfast. Ain't hungry. She frowned. You always are. Not today. There was something cold in his tone, colder than the snow still on the ground. Mara stepped closer, searching his eyes. You're pushing me off, Cole. Why? He turned away, jaw tightening. Because folks are talking. That's why. You don't need your name dragged through the mud. Cause of me. Her voice rose a little, not angry, just pained. You think I care what they say? Let him talk till their tongues freeze. I know who I am, and I know what happened that night. You don't understand, he said quietly. You deserve better than a man with ghosts. You mean a man who's scared. That hit harder than he wanted to admit. He turned, eyes dark. You don't know me, Mara. She didn't flinch. Then let me stop hiding behind fences and scars and that pride of yours. You think it's strength, but it's just loneliness wearing a cowboy hat. Her words hung in the air, too sharp, too true. Cole didn't say another word. He just stepped back, closed the door, and let the sound of her footsteps fade into the wind. Days turned into weeks. Mara stopped coming by. The snow melted slow, turning the dirt road into rivers of mud. The sound of birds came back, but Cole didn't notice. The cabin felt emptier than ever. Every creak, every shadow a reminder of what he'd driven away. He threw himself into work, fixing fences, clearing fields, mending tack, anything to drown out the echo of her voice. But come nightfall, when the fire burned low and the wind whispered through the cracks, he'd catch himself reaching for the other cup, the one she always used. And every time his hand stopped halfway. One evening, Harvey rode out to the ranch, a half-smile under his gray mustache. Heard you run Mara off, he said. Ain't my business what she does. You're a fool if you think that's true. Cole said nothing, but Harvey just sighed, shaking his head. You ever notice how a man can survive winters, storms, loss, but let one good woman walk away, and he's half dead by spring? Cole looked up sharply. Harvey chuckled, patting his shoulder. Don't wait too long, son. The heart's like the land, needs a little warmth to grow again. And just like that, Harvey rode off, leaving Cole alone with words that wouldn't stop echoing. That night, as the last of the snow melted into the valley and the frogs began to sing in the creek, Cole Tanner sat on his porch, staring into the dark. He thought about her laugh, her stubbornness, the fire in her eyes when she challenged him. He thought about the storm, how she'd stayed when every other soul in his life had left. And for the first time, Cole realized that loneliness wasn't peace. It was just fear pretending to be strength. He stood slowly, looking out toward the road leading to town. His heart pounded with a feeling he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. Maybe it's time, he muttered under his breath. Maybe it's time to stop running. Spring rolled into Silver Creek slow and tender, the kind that comes after a hard winter, when the ground is still cold but the air smells like hope. The river had thawed, and the meadows were waking under a soft green. The town was busy again, wagons rolling, children running, laughter carrying through the streets. But Cole Tanner hadn't been part of that laughter in a long time. Not since the day he shut his door on Mara Dwyer and the warmth she brought with her. He tried to move on, tried to live like nothing had changed. But every sunrise felt wrong without her, and every sunset reminded him of what he'd lost. By the second week of April, he'd had enough of pretending. That morning, he shaved for the first time in months, cleaned his boots, brushed the dust off his hat. It wasn't vanity. It was something closer to purpose. He saddled Dusty, cinched the straps tight, and rode toward town with a steady determination of a man finally ready to stop running from himself. The townsfolk watched him pass, their whispers trailing after him like shadows. But this time he didn't care, not one bit. When he pushed open the saloon doors, the room fell quiet again, same as always when Cole Tanner walked in. Only this time, he wasn't looking for a fight or a drink or a place to hide from the cold. He was looking for her. Mara stood behind the bar, pouring coffee for a miner. Her eyes flicked up, startled when she saw him, and for a heartbeat neither of them moved. Then she turned away, busying herself with the cups. "You looking for something, Tanner?" she asked, her voice steady but cool. He stepped closer. "Yeah," he said quietly. "For you." The chatter in the saloon faded to a hush. Mara froze, her hand stilling on the counter. "I told you once," she said softly. "I don't need Savant. Ain't here to save you," he replied. "I'm here 'cause I finally figure out what needs Savant is me." That made her look up. The fire in her eyes was still there. Same boldness, same spark that first caught him off guard that night on his porch. "Why now, Cole?" she asked, almost whispering. "Why after pushing me away?" He took off his hat, holding it in both hands, a gesture of humility that didn't come easy to him. "Because I was a fool," he said. "Spent so long building walls I forgot what it felt like to have someone try to climb them. Thought I was protecting myself, but I was just hiding." Mara said nothing. The silence stretched long, like the space between thunder and rain. "You asked me once," Cole went on, his voice low but steady, "if I wanted a wife or just another winter alone." He took a slow step closer. "I thought I wanted the cold. Thought I could live with it. Turns out I can't." Her eyes softened. "You sure this ain't just loneliness talking?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. This is a man talking who's done being scared, who's tired of staring at four empty walls and call it peace." The saloon was dead quiet now. Every miner, rancher, and poker player froze in their seats, watching something rare. A cowboy laying down his pride. Cole reached out, his voice almost a whisper. "You told me once I needed warmth. Well, Mara Dwyer, I found it, and I don't aim to lose it again. Not if you'll have me." For a moment, Mara didn't move. Her eyes glistened just a little. Not tears, but something softer. Then, slow and sure, she set down the cup she'd been holding, walked around the bar, and stood right in front of him. "You're a stubborn man, Cole Tanner," she said quietly. "Guilty," he murmured. "Took you near a whole winter to admit you needed someone. Worth every cold night." A small laugh escaped her, that same warm, free sound that had once filled his cabin. "You really mean it?" she asked. "More than I ever meant a thing in my life." She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. All right then, cowboy. Guess you ain't spending another winter alone. And with that, she leaned in and kissed him. Soft, sure, full of everything unspoken between them. The saloon erupted in applause and laughter. Someone called out, "'Bout time, Tanner," but neither of them heard. All Cole knew was the warmth of her hand in his, the sound of her breath, and the feeling that for the first time in years, the world had finally thawed. Later, when they stepped outside, the sun was setting over Silver Creek, painting the valley gold. Cole turned to her, smiling faintly. "You reckon folks keep talking?" "Let 'em," she said, slipping her hand into his. "This time, we'll give him something worth talking about." He laughed, a low, easy sound that felt strange on his tongue. And as the two of them walked down that dusty street together, side by side, the last of winter's chill faded into the mountains behind them. A tale of pride broken, love found, and a cowboy who finally chose warmth over solitude.